All right, here we go. Kinesiology 223. This is chapter 24. We're talking about aggression in sports. This is a pretty short chapter. Let me get myself out of the way here. And I have to admit, it's a short chapter. We're only going to have a couple presentations, and we're going to start off with defining aggression. So the book has these 5 main bullet points that we're looking to hit on. We're going to define it. We're going to kind of identify some of the causes, examine some of the special considerations, etc. And there's a relationship they have in terms of aggressiveness and sports behavior. And, to a certain degree, when we talk about aggression, uh, aggression can be subcategorized into good aggression and bad aggression, right? So sometimes you have to get kind of fired up. You got to go ahead and get motivated. You got to go ahead and rise to the occasion. Many different ways to describe aggression in that context. And oftentimes you'll have coaches will use that as a tool. They'll have a coach that'll kind of push an aggressive agenda. And oftentimes you see within the context of a particular sport, you have, let's take football, for example. You have a very aggressive defensive coordinator. You have a very aggressive defensive mindset. The coach is aggressive. The defense is aggressive. On the offensive side of the ball, you have somebody who has maybe like a precision mindset. He's not as aggressive. He's calm, cool, collective. The operation that you have on the offensive side and the defensive side is a little bit different. Many times you have your offensive linemen, defensive linemen have, they want to just beat the snot out of each other, but the aggressiveness that you have in terms of how they play the game sometimes is a little bit different. Now, I'll say this. Whether you're talking about, like they say here in volleyball in the book, or you're talking about football, you have aggressiveness in terms of like driving towards the play, driving towards the net, whatever it might be. But you also have bad aggression. Now, bad aggression usually involves another person. And by that, I mean it's usually the opponent. So the good aggression is usually categorized as something where it's a behavior where you're playing harder, you're playing with more assertion, you're going after the ball, etc. Bad aggression is you kind of take it out on the opposing player. Yeah. And the book kind of talks about how it's desirable and undesirable, and good or bad seems to depend upon the interpretation. I would say, just having played sports and having coached sports as well at different levels, I would say there's many times the differentiation between good aggression and bad aggression is where the aggressive behavior is directed towards. But let's dig into this a little bit further and see what the book has to say here. So, criteria for aggression. We have 4 main points here. It's a behavior with intent to harm or injure and directed towards a living organism, and it's motivated to avoid the harm itself. Now, I will tell you, when it comes to participation in a sport, sometimes your mindset is, I'm going to go ahead and spank this volleyball at the opposing player and knock them on their backside. I'm going to go ahead and block this person into the sidelines. Sometimes the aggressive behavior is with intent to belittle, harm, or have a physical dominance over your opponent. And so I kind of push back on the book here, because it's not like we run around stepping on each other's shadows when we play the sport of football or lacrosse. I mean, we have a physical component to the game that relies very much on an aggressive mindset and the ability to channel that aggression into another player. And that's just part of the game. Now, aggressiveness can also take its place, say, like in weightlifting. If somebody has an aggressive mindset where they come in, they want to attack the bar. And aggression itself can be negative to the participant because it could take away from one's game. And I said it before, usually your leaders in the huddle are not the ones screaming. They're the ones who are like the quiet leaders who go out and actually focus and channel their energy into the task at hand, which usually is the opponent. So aggression itself could be, when we get over here, could be physical or verbal behavior. They say it's not an attitude or an emotion. Aggression involves harm or injury, which may be either physical or psychological. I think that's true, in terms of when you're playing against somebody else, oftentimes there's chatter that happens back and forth in the field of play. And, that talking smack back and forth is specifically designed to take the other person out of their game. And it depends, how you handle that and how you deliver that. But it's very much directed towards another person. Like when you're playing basketball, you're generally guarding the other guard. If you play forward, you're guarding the other forward. If you're center, you're against the center. You'll have some switches in there, but usually you get to know the person that you're guarding really well for that time. Same thing in football. You're covering a receiver. You kind of get stuck covering the same receiver the whole time. And you have this kind of relationship that builds over the course of a game as you get to know the person's nuances, etc. You have a little bit of an understanding on the front end just from watching film, but you kind of at play after play after play after play get to know the other person for sure. But the intent that they talk about here is basically it's a behavior to inflict harm, whether it's psychological or physical, into the opponent. And it's with intent, which that is absolutely true. Now, I will say this. They talk about aggressive versus assertive behavior. And so they kind of reclassify the good aggression into assertive behavior. And so it's like not all aggression is bad per se. And aggression can have its place when playing within the rules, but you're playing with high intensity and you have high emotion and you can still have the chatter back and forth with the opposing player and there's some good banter that goes back and forth, but it's not in terms of negativity, in terms of your making character assassination comments towards that person or saying things per se that are going to be psychologically or emotionally damaging. That's great. But I'll tell you, when you're playing a game and you're on the field and the other player is talking smack to you about your mama, you're going to chatter back at him, or you're just going to completely ignore him, and then you're going to physically basically take him out of the game. And that's part of it, right? And that's part of what happens in competitive athletics. One person talks smack to the other one, and the person who is the receiver of that has a choice. They can either engage with that person, be taken out of their game, presuming that's not their game, get taken out of the game mentally, or they can be mentally strong enough, ignore that person, and on the next play, just basically knock them over. That happens. And that's the real world of athletics. So I think there's a little bit of a Pollyanna thing going on here in terms of how the authors are writing this up. You might have it where being assertive is a good thing, but I would tell you also good aggression has its place in a game. Now you have hostile and instrumental aggression. Hostile aggression is reactive, reactive with the primary intent to injure or cause psychological harm. Instrumental, it occurs in the process of a non-aggressive goal. So the way to describe it is, you're trying to, and they use a sense of the example of a boxer. So you have a person who's boxing, they're trying to maybe punch the person in the jaw, and the person lands a really solid blow to the opponent's head, which causes an injury. And that would be something that's just part of the game, and it's part of being a good boxer is landing blows on your opponent. And it's not without malice per se, though I would contend that some of your boxers probably have a malicious mindset and they have an intent to do harm. If you look at MMA, it's very similar in terms of there's an intent to do harm to a point because the harm inflicts discomfort or pain, which causes the person to tap out. The instrumental aggression that's applied in the octagon is used as a way to inflict pain to the point where you knock the person out. So it's not even a tap out. So the concept you have here is within the context of aggression, you have good and bad aggression, you have hostile and instrumental aggression, and one is more reactive to the situation and one is part of a non-aggressive goal itself. So the book provides that most aggression in sport is instrumental as opposed to reactive, but I will tell you you're going to have some reactiveness per se. Despite this, there's times where there is extracurricular instrumental aggression that spills over into reactive. And they note this here. The previous argument notwithstanding, most aggression in sport is more instrumental than reactive. They talk about a wrestler squeezes an opponent ribs cage to create discomfort and turn him over. Cornerback delivers a hard hit to a receiver to deter him from running a pass route. Those are part of it. Basketball coach calls a timeout when an opposing player is on the foul line, trying to cause psychological discomfort, all within the context of fair play. No doubt about it. Now, with hostile and instrumental aggression, the demands of the sport, right, can dictate what is hostile and what is instrumental. And there can be, on a continuum, varying degrees of each one of these. And I would contest that on a spectrum, you have this instrumental aggression, which can absolutely spill over into hostile aggression. And there's times where you kind of have this border between the two when you play a sport. But the point they make here, although most sporting aggression is primarily instrumental, that does not make it acceptable. If you're a defensive coordinator, you might argue with that, defensive coordinator in football. Professionals in sport and exercise science must have a well thought out philosophy regarding what is acceptable assertive behavior, what is unacceptable instrumental aggressive behavior, and what is unacceptable antisocial behavior. So now they're introducing in something a little bit different here in terms of antisocial behavior. And again, sometimes athletes are rewarded for having a hostile mindset, being what could be considered particularly violent in a sport. And there's a reward system in place that coaches many times put in to reward athletes for being very aggressive and inflicting bodily harm on other players. I ask you to look no further than Bountygate, which was the New Orleans Saints offering bounties of $10,000. They would say stacks, or I'll give you a stack if you hurt this quarterback. And so the defensive coordinator and the head coach knew about it as well, were in on offering financial incentives to their defensive players to injure opposing offensive players. That clearly crosses a line from something as simple as instrumental aggression is seen in football to being more, let me go back one slide, to being more hostile aggression. And then it becomes, in some regards, more antisocial behavior, right? Because you're basically paying people off to injure other players. So maybe take a minute to just look up New Orleans Saints Bountygate, and you'll see what I'm talking about. All right, I'm going to move on to the next presentation. Thanks.